The following is a paid program, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent the opinions of the management of this station or Pamel Broadcasting.
Good morning. This is 1 in 36, a presentation from Anderson Center for Autism. 1 in 36 is a weekly show devoted to autism spectrum disorder.
Good morning and welcome to 1 in 36, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky, Chief Development Officer at Anderson Center for Autism. And today I am very pleased to have on the show my guest, Kathleen Somers. Kathy is a mom. She is an author of a book called Barely Visible, Mothering a Son Through His Misunderstood Autism. Kathy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Eliza, for having me here. I'm grateful to be here today.
I'm really glad you came on. You reached out to us and talked a little bit about your book. I read it. I didn't expect what I read. I've read a bunch of books by parents who I think write these books and tell their stories and tell the stories of parenting and raising their child with autism. They're all unique to that particular parent and family and that child. And I think it's an amazing way for families to support each other while also going through their own process, because I think writing can be a very cathartic experience. Yours had some really unique parts of it, and I think what just kept screaming at me through the reading of the book was your honesty. You talked about a lot of aspects of your experience that I think perhaps are hard to put out there, maybe even to your close family and friends, but then you did it through a book, which means it's in the hands of lots of people you don't know. So I want to talk about it, but I want to start by just asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and then we'll get into the book.
So I am a freelance graphic designer and copywriter, and I am mother of a 24-year-old son who has high-functioning autism. In 2007, he was not quite 7 years old. He was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. And I will apologize right up front to anyone that takes offense to those words. It is not any indication of any sort of racial bias on my part. That was the formal diagnosis that he received, and those are the words that we've always used. And, I never set out to write this book necessarily. When we got that diagnosis, nobody knew anything about what was going on. He had seen a pediatric neurologist who saw him 3 times, and who gave the diagnosis and made some suggestions. None of the therapists whose help we sought out had any idea how to help him. They threw their hands up. Some of them just outright said, "I won't help you." His teachers dismissed the diagnosis. They were all about, okay, he needs accommodations. We developed an IEP, but we don't believe he has this. There was no talk of autism. So what do you think we did? I mean, these were the people that were seeing him every day. So we just assumed, okay, they know what they're talking about. And we just swept the whole thing under the rug. And there weren't the resources available then that there are today. So, we didn't know what to do. We just thought, well, he's 6, going on 7. He's a handful, but he'll grow out of this. And obviously, it was the worst thing that we could have done. And my reason for writing this book, initially, I thought, well, there was nothing out there for us to read. Maybe I can write something that will help other parents. And as I got into it, I quickly realized I am not the one to write any sort of parenting manual with best practices or helpful hints, because I did absolutely everything wrong. And so the writing became a memoir. It became me. Honestly, it was a confession of, okay, this kid has driven me absolutely nuts, but we've gotten through it, and every day has been a step forward. And he now is turning into this amazing young man, and he truly is my best friend. He drives me nuts still, but he truly is my best friend. And I wanted to share that with the world.
Yes. I mean, that all of that came through throughout the book. It was, and I love that you say, very confidently now that he is your best friend, having read it. And I encourage our listeners to get a copy and to read this book. It's, you can see that friendship developing, but it's a hard one. It's like you've shared so many life experiences as parents do with their children, but yours were infused with, from my perspective as a reader, just this unbelievably intense level of emotion all the time. And even at the times when it felt more stable, or more comfortable or more happy or positive, there was this underlying, like, always, when is the next thing going to happen? So I'm sort of not surprised, but I love that you put it that way and that you see it that way. I also have been struck by the fact that you shifted it from a sort of how to, which a lot of people do try to do. I think they kind of, I've learned this along the way, so let me pass on what I've learned. That was the other thing that surprised me. I was sort of prepared to read another book that had that kind of feel to it, where I just want people to have an easier kind of ride with this and journey with this than I did. And your message did not come to me that way. It was more like, I need to say out loud that this was how my journey went, because it really was. It was really hard. And your feelings of sort of your honesty about the things that you, as you said, that you feel, I'm not going to say that, but that you feel that you sort of got wrong, or, sort of made your best effort and it wasn't the path that was the right one at the time. That was unique. I have so many questions. Let's start with the title. You titled this book Barely Visible. That's the main title. The subtitle is Mothering a Son Through His Misunderstood Autism. But why barely visible? What does that bring up for you? What does that say?
Well, there are several reasons. First, prior to having my son, I was pregnant with a little girl. And at 5.5 months, we found out that something was very wrong with her. And we were told that, this baby has no chance of any kind of life, if she even has a chance of survival. But she will look normal. And that always, throughout that whole process of making that very difficult decision of needing to terminate that pregnancy, I kept coming back to, but she'll look normal. And I thought, is that what's so important to all of us? And I truly believe that we had to give that baby up because she was not the path that we were meant to follow. I mean, her disability would have been so visible that everyone would have been like so accommodating, like, it's okay, we get it. And here I ended up having this child who's, he's high functioning. His disability is not visible on the surface. And that makes it so much more difficult. And the lessons that I have learned throughout raising him, and quite honestly, I am just learning them now that he's an adult. So, it was this whole thing about what your baby will look like. And his disability is not visible. And at the same time, because it's not visible, I'm fearful that he will be invisible throughout his life journey, because it's easier for him that way to remain in the shadows. So there's a lot of meaning behind that title.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Has he read the book?
He has not.
Does he have any interest?
No, because he knows all the stories. He's like, I live that, I live that, I live that.
I don't need to do it again.
Yeah, exactly. So, and quite honestly, in his mind, all of those stories are perfectly normal. Which, for him, they were perfectly normal. It's just they were very trying.
Yeah, very trying. Some were heartbreaking. Some I can, you describe sort of the embarrassment and also the anger. There's a whole section I remember on people who came into your life who sort of stepped in both a pushing you kind of way, but also you got to witness what it really is like to have somebody who I would say in my vernacular, has your back and has his back and is going to step in and defend when necessary. So many things. I just keep thinking about baseball throughout this conversation, but I don't want to give too much away because I want the readers to go buy the book and read it yourself. But there's so many things that are both relatable and then just sort of unbelievable at the same time. So since he has no interest in reading it, he knows you've done it. He's lived the stories. We only have about 2 minutes in the first half of the show here. Can you tell us what the reaction and response to the book has been by either other members of your family or friends, colleagues? Did you have any response? Have you gotten some big responses from anybody on from any perspective?
I have gotten so many wonderful responses. couple negative responses, but that's okay. I would expect that. From other parents, I've had so many, most of them were either neighbors or friends because the book just came out today. Their response was, I sat there reading it and my head was going up and down like, yes, 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 I get it. And I have a neighbor who has a son who's 7 years old, and she said, do you mind if I pass this out to the whole neighborhood? Because I'm hoping it will help them to understand Chase. Like she thanked me so many times. She's like, oh my God, you went through this too. I am so grateful to have read this and know that you are thinking, or you thought and felt all the same things that I am thinking and feeling right now. So to hear that, like I said, I wasn't trying to teach anybody anything. I was just trying to create space for others to feel a little less overwhelmed, less exhausted, and know that, I'm kind of holding their hand as they walk through this. I've had people from other countries reach out to me.
Wow, that's great.
That saw something on social media. I had a woman in West Virginia ask me if I would have interest in talking to her on the phone. Our first conversation was 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Text back and forth. And
I'm not surprised. I say often, and I've learned a lot of this through doing this podcast, but in other things that I get involved in too, you see it. The autism community is both, at the same time, it is huge because you think about 1 in 36 children being diagnosed on the spectrum, somewhere on the spectrum in this country every year. But it is also tiny in that it's a community of people who write books and then answer phone calls and spend 90 minutes talking to each other, or have a neighbor who all of a sudden says, can I hand this out to the neighborhood so that they'll understand my son? It's sort of that tightness and closeness and I think mutual need and understanding, but on this enormous scale, the more and more people we know are living with autism and raising children with autism. So it's, that's those stories just kind of, reinforce that for me in terms of the autism community. We have to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll jump back into this conversation. Talking with Kathleen Somers, author of Barely Visible, Mothering a Son Through His Misunderstood Autism. This is 1 in 36, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder, and we'll be right back.
If I could be you.
And you could be me for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes. If you're talking, they will hear you.
We all want our kids to grow up safe and healthy. So we show them how. And we tell them with honest conversations that let them know what we expect. Not just one time, but every chance we get. That's especially important when it comes to alcohol and other drugs. Kids not only need to know the dangers and how to avoid them, they need to hear it often from you. And when it comes to pain medications, opioids, they need to know that they should never be taken without a prescription and never shared with friends or family. It's dangerous and illegal. So talk with your kids and guide them through the challenges of growing up safe and healthy. Because when you talk, they hear you. For more information about talking with your kids about underage use of alcohol and other drugs, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov.
So talk, they hear you. You can do it if you try.
At Wheelchairs for Warriors, serving America's heroes is our mission. With your support, we serve veterans and first responders injured in the line of duty across the United States of America, providing them custom-fit, complex rehab mobility solutions to ensure they rejoin their lives at the highest level of independent mobility and function possible. Join the mission at wheelchairsforwarriors.org.
And now, 1 in 36 continues on 100.7 WHUD. This is a weekly community affairs program presented by the Anderson Center for Autism.
Welcome back to 1 in 36, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky, and I'm talking today with Kathy Somers, a mother, an author of a book that just came became available called Barely Visible, Mothering a Son Through His Misunderstood Autism. I think that you, Kathy, you started this book, or you start the story and your memoir before your son is born. Mm-hmm. And today he is 24 years old, correct? Okay, so it really does. It actually, again, also another unique part about this book is that we get to meet you and your neighbors and your family as individual people before you had children. And I think that also sets the tone that probably was quite had a lot of relevance for a number of other people who are going to read this book in terms of making those early decisions about having children, not having children, and then sort of moving through that experience of what's the difficult time for everybody, right? Infancy and lack of sleep and all that goes along with that, and then into this. So, I just lay that out because I'm curious if there's a part of the memoir. Can I call it a memoir? I feel like that's better. It really is like a great word for it. Was there a part of the memoir, either while you were writing it or now that it's completed, that really stands out to you, or maybe was like you feel like the most incredibly hard part to write?
So initially, I mean, obviously that first pregnancy, initially I had no intention of including that until once I started writing, I realized just how big a piece that was of this journey. And I think, in terms of the portions about my son, which is obviously the bulk of the book, none of the events were particularly difficult to write about. I think what I struggled most with was the fact that I was living in the past. It took me almost 10 years to complete this book. And for that time, a lot of the time I was living in the past, trying to recall memories and, specifics of the different events that happened. And I worry, did that time that I spent living in the past impact my ability to parent him in the present moment? Or was it helpful in that, in going back and looking at how he reacted to situations when he was 8 or 10 or 12 years old, did that give me a better perspective on how he was reacting at 16, 18? So there was this constant struggle for me about where I was at any point in time. I don't have the answer to whether or not it was destructive or beneficial, but that was definitely the biggest struggle for me.
Okay. All right. So the beginning part of your first pregnancy, that was a piece that you decided later to add. Was there anything else that you sort of were on the fence of? Is this relevant? Do I want to include this? Should I not? And I'm almost asking about towards the end of the book, where he's getting older, your life is changing. You talk about how that were then decisions that you were making about your own adult life that had now moved sort of beyond being a mom and going through this incredible parenting journey. So was that always your intention to sort of bring it all the way there, or was that added later?
No, I don't think that was initially my intention. Like I said, when I started writing, my intention was to share my experience so I could help other parents.
Yeah.
But as I was writing, and as I was allowing myself to be honest, I realized that this was becoming a memoir. And I thought, well, if I'm going to allow myself to be honest, then I'm going to allow myself to put it all out there. Because, I had this difficult pregnancy. My son's father and I went through a divorce. I was trying to rebuild a life. There were all those life circumstances swirling around me while I'm trying to figure out what is going on with my son and how do I best raise this child. And I don't think there's any parent out there that isn't experiencing the rest of life while they're dealing with parenting. So to not be honest about that it's a disservice to anybody that reads the book.
Yeah, I agree. I think it makes it less relatable when you don't include those other aspects of what's going on. That's true. So you describe in this book, in Barely Visible, a number, like a really large number of experiences. I think you did a beautiful job of really painting a picture of. For me, it clicked for me. I could imagine all of the moments you were describing and the different locations you were in, and I would say there's probably an equal number of memories and stories that you tell that were quiet at home, tired, after, maybe after everybody's gone to sleep, where it's you and your thoughts and your kind of recognition of what had happened that day and kind of piecing it all together. But there are also quite a number of stories of things that happened in huge public arenas, schools, baseball fields, New York City, vacations with all these, unimaginable or probably, we all have our expectations of what a vacation is going to look like, and then the reality of what one looks like. But then you had this additional sort of like, and then maybe even more than that, right? So, so when you're balancing all those stories and picking and choosing which ones you're gonna share, would you say any are harder or were harder in the moment to deal with? A lot of people, I think, talk about the public stuff being really, really difficult because you sort of feel like everybody's eyes are on you. But I wonder sometimes if the really private stuff is maybe sometimes even harder because then it's so raw. It's just you. It's just you.
Yeah. So there are so many stories way beyond the book. And in writing this book, what I had to do was go through all those experiences and try and single out ones that I could link together and create a thread that would both paint a picture of what my son was like at all stages of his life and how he is now, enable me to describe my emotions. A lot of those emotions were similar from event to event to event, but, this particular story really, gave me an opportunity to highlight it. So I needed to create this thread, and I'm hoping that in doing that, in leaving out so much that was important, all of those feelings, all of those specifics paint, a continuous thread just to share the journey. It was for lack of a better word, a vehicle for sharing our story. And I think that the quiet moments were the hardest, for sure. I mean, in the moment, yes, you're like in a public space when your child is doing something that you absolutely can't imagine that they would do. You're embarrassed. You're trying to cover up. You're trying to salvage a good situation and get whatever you can out of it. Really what's hard is when you walk away and you say to yourself, I didn't ask for this. Why can't my kid be like every other kid? And it's in those moments that you kind of just want to break down.
I think, again, in the memoir, I think that sort of pain and the two different types of experiences, I think you really bring across. And I think that your desire to do this and to put this out there, both for yourself and for so many other people who are going to read it, and hopefully, it will help them. It will make them maybe feel not as alone, that other people have gone through this, that you've gone through this. I think the fact that you're responsive to people who call you or email you and say, can we talk, is great. That is truly how I mean, if you think about it, we're just starting, 2025's Autism Acceptance Month. My take on the awareness movement, which has been going on for so long, that thankfully is now moving into acceptance, at least from my perspective. But a lot of the advocacy work, all of it is starting to really come to life in that I think more parents than ever are recognizing that they also need to take care of themselves, and that they can and should be reaching out to other people to talk, and so I appreciate, on behalf of everybody at Anderson certainly, but I'm sure beyond that you decided to write this memoir and to share your life. And I don't want to run out of time. I want to give you the chance to tell us where to buy the book, and how to follow you. If I don't know if there's going to be anything coming from you in addition, but where can we follow you and where can we get the book?
So the book is available now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, Books A Million, bookshop.org, just about anywhere. It's in a lot of local bookstores, which is great.
Yeah.
Anybody can go to my website, Kathleen Somers, Somers, and there are links there to Instagram and Facebook, or you can just, go on Instagram and Facebook and look up Kathleen Somers and you'll find me there. And I just want to say thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I think this conversation is oftentimes embarrassing and uncomfortable for a lot of parents. And, I put out a book that is kind of embarrassing and uncomfortable. So hopefully a lot of people will relate to that story.
I think so. I think overwhelmingly you put out a memoir that is honest. And, our lives are often complicated and uncomfortable. They're not always perfect. And I think the idea that portray that something did not happen is not going to help anybody. So again, I appreciate your honesty. I really have enjoyed our conversation. Listeners, check out Barely Visible, Mothering a Son Through His Misunderstood Autism by Kathleen Somers. It is really a unique read, and I encourage you all to check it out. Also, a little shout out to local bookstores. Everybody's struggling, so if you can buy it at a local shop as opposed to one of the bigger ones, do it. But either way, get your hands on a copy and read up. And thank you so much, Kathy, for being on the show today.
Thank you, Eliza.
This is 1 in 36, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky, and remember, Anderson cares.
You've been listening to 1 in 36, a weekly presentation from Anderson Center for Autism. Join them for another edition of the show next weekend.